Good evening, everyone. I am the chair of Winchester Historical Society's program committee. My name is Hilda Wong-Du, and I have the honor of presenting tonight's speaker. Ken Gloss is the current proprietor of the Brattle Bookshop. Founded in Boston in 1825, the shop has been owned by the Gloss family since 1949. His father put him to work at the store when he was 5, and he has been full-time since 1973. Mr. Gloss is the past president of the New England chapter of the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America. He appraises books and libraries for several universities, including Harvard, Boston University, as well as our nearby Tufts and many others. Mr. Gloss lectures throughout New England on the antiquarian book field. He has also written many articles on appraising books, book collecting, and selling. Please welcome Ken Gloss.
Well, thank you very much. I will say that I'm very happy to do this on Zoom. I hope for everybody's sake, maybe a few years down the line, we can, and before that, we can do these live again. It's nice seeing everybody. But in any case, what I do in a talk, the talk will last about an hour. The first half hour, 40 minutes, I'll talk about some of the background of the store, my background, but also tell some stories, anecdotes of people, places, interesting books, items that I've seen over the years. And then what I like to do is open it up to question and answer, because I can go on and on and on and on about old books. And at least with question and answer, I can go on about what you want to listen to. In the question and answer, I can try to do a couple of the appraisals if people have those kind of questions. It's a little harder to do on Zoom than if I was there live. And I will say at the beginning, any questions I don't get to, any appraisals I don't get to because of the time limits, if you get in touch either through email or whatever, all day long at the store, we'll make sure that all the questions, everything gets answered. In any case, let me give a little of the background. The history of the store does go back to the 1820s, but for all practical purposes, it was going out of business in 1949. My father was getting married. My mother had $500. And with that, they bought half interest in the Brattle Bookshop. And it's always been in Boston. People call us from Harvard Square and say, "Where are you?" We tell them we're in downtown. When my parents bought the store, there was a little side street in what was Scully Square called Brattle Street. To make it even more confusing, the street doesn't exist anymore. It's where Boston City Hall Plaza is now. We've had 7 different locations over the years, mainly due to urban renewal. And every time it was a planned move, my father would move the best books over to the new location, and then he'd run sales. Half price, 50-cent, dollar, 25 cents. But the last day of the sale, everything was free. And he would literally have hundreds of people line up with bags, packs, satchels, whatever. He'd ring a big bell. People go charging into the store, grab whatever they could grab. 5 minutes later, he'd ring the bell again. That group would leave. The next group would come in. And he gave away over 250,000 books that way. Now, the last time he did this was in 1969. And we were moving from the end of Washington Street near Boston City Hall to West Street, where we are now. And at the end of the giveaway, there were books left over. And like I said, my father built the store. He was his love, hard work, knowledge, but he was also a character and a showman. And what he did was he hired a covered wagon with a cowboy and a horse team. And on the cover of the covered wagon, it said, "Go West, book lovers. Go 5 West Street, Brattle Bookshop." They filled it with books, and they drove it from the end of Washington Street near Boston City Hall, up Court Street, down Tremont by the Boston Common to where West Street is, and then back down Washington with my father sitting in back, throwing books out the whole way. Now, the superintendent in charge of traffic told him he could do it all morning, but within an hour, the city was in an absolute standstill. They told him to stop. He didn't care. He'd gotten his point across. And we've been on West Street since then. When we first moved in, we were in a 5-story, 150-year-old wooden building, absolutely crammed full of books. In February of 1980, I got a call at 4 o'clock in the morning. The building was on fire, and it literally burnt to the ground. I mean, it was 100% gone. We didn't have very much insurance, matter of fact, almost none, but we wanted to keep going, continue. We found a storefront a few doors up the street. We rented folding tables. People either sold, gave us, donated books. Kevin White, who was the mayor at the time, came down with a carload of books. And even though it was a meager stock, within a month we reopened. The main thing was just keep going. The next 4 years, we slowly but surely rebuilt the stock. 4 years after that, we bought the building we're in now, which is, again, a few doors down on West Street. And it's sort of the old Dickensian type of store. Outside stands at $1, 3 and 5, 2 floors of general used books, and then a third floor with rare books, autographs, manuscripts, leather bindings, and so on. And that type of business, the large, old, general secondhand bookstore, especially in the inner cities, is a dying business. It's not dying because people don't like books, buy books, read books, sell books. But in the last 20, 30 years, property value has gone so high, that rent has gone so high, that old bookstores, which are not the most efficiently run businesses in the world, one right after the other, have been going out of business. And since the internet, that's just speeded it along. And needless to say, the last year has not been the best in the world. I mean, we own our property, so I hope to be doing this for years to come. I have daughters who are in their 30s. I don't think they intend to come into it. And I've been doing this all my life. My parents say my first word was book. I really don't know. Maybe it was. I'm sure they were talking about them. And then I did work after school in elementary, junior high school, summers during college. I do have a degree in chemistry from the University of Massachusetts. I was going to get a doctoral degree at the University of Wisconsin, but in 1973, I needed a year off. My father's health wasn't that good. That year now has been over 40 years, and I don't regret for a minute that I'm doing this and not in a laboratory somewhere. And one of the most fun parts about the business, along with the people, along with getting books in, is the hunt, is going out. It's almost like being Jim Hawkins on Treasure Island every day, never knowing who you're going to see, what you're going to meet, the people, the books. And I'll relate a few of those stories to you and then tell about some of the characters and people. And matter of fact, even before that, it's not just the characters who come into the store. Sometimes it's even the people who work at the store. I remember this is right when I started, 40-something years ago, I hired a man. He was very good. He was about my age at the time. And I remember about a few days after he started working, an older man came into the store, and probably is younger than I am now, but an older man came into the store. He wanted books by an author called Donifred Yates, an obscure novelist. I knew who he was. We went over to the section. I looked. We didn't have any. I said, would you like to leave your name because we do get them in? The man said, no, I'll check again some other time. He leaves. The new employee comes up to me. He goes, does that man come in here often? And I said, I really wasn't paying much attention. But no, I didn't. He doesn't. He goes, well, that was J.D. Salinger. I used to date his daughter. And so you never know. And this new employee had one to introduce me to somebody, and it's one of the most memorable introductions, to the point where I still remember it. We had 4 tickets to a Celtics game. And I said to him, Hugh, do you want to go to the game? I have 2 extra tickets. And he said, yeah, but give me the tickets. I'll bring someone with me. My wife and I got there. He was sitting with a woman. He turns around, he goes, oh, this is my wife, Mickey. We're getting divorced tomorrow. What do you say to an introduction like that? In any case, he worked a number of years. And so it is a lot of times the people, and you never know who's going to come in. And I always tell my employees, you don't know who someone is. You treat everybody well. Not everybody's a nice person, but when I first started working, there was a man who came in, and he liked the story. He went to Harvard Business School, and he had come in when he was a student, and my father treated him well. He collected books. And he worked for a bank in North Carolina, in Charlotte, and he was a vice president of the bank, but not to downgrade vice presidencies at banks, but a lot of people are vice presidents. But he used to go to New York every once in a while, and he would call me sometimes. I get to work. My wife says I only work half a day. I get to work at 5:30. We close at 5:30. It's only 12 hours. It's half a day. So I do work half a day. But he knew I always get in early. And he said, look, I have to go to New York, but I can take the first plane from New York to Boston. Can I come in at 7 in the morning? And then I can get a 9 or 10 o'clock flight back to Charlotte. And I said, fine. He was a very, very nice man. And he also bought books. But this would go on for a few years. And you'd see his card, vice president, senior vice president, executive vice president. A few years after that, his bank merged with another bank. And then he was president of Bank of America. And he'd still call me up in the morning and, sometimes say, I'm going to be in early. Could you open up for me? And I said, sure, you can come in early. So the president of the Bank of America, one of the nicest guys at the time that you could ever meet. So again, you never know what you're going to see. But going out to houses and estates, I mean, that's how we get most of our books. Usually it's for every reason you can think of, but usually it's an older person or couple moving to the smaller place, downsizing, or it's an estate. Any case, a few stories. I got a call from a lady. Her name was Mrs. Fisher. I was out of the store. There was a message. I called her up. She said, oh, yes, my father died in Providence. He has 500 art reference books. We want to get the best price we can. Would you be interested in going? I said, sure. Providence isn't very far away. We drive all over the Northeast for books and sometimes go further. And 500 art reference books sounded interesting. Got to the house. It was in Providence. It was in a street called Benefit Street up near Brown University. I got to the house, got led through a colonial house into a garage, second floor of the garage. There were 5,000 books. Well, it turned out her married name was Fisher. Her father's name was John Nicholas Brown. Family founded Brown University, one of the wealthier families in the country. And after 6 months, I bought about 80% of the books I wanted. I was pleased. She was happy. And she said, my mother has a lot of books. Most are being given to the university. Some are being sold at auction. But would you like to go to Newport to take a look at the books there? Well, their house in Newport was one of the mansions on the ocean. I mentioned this to my wife. She decided to come with me on this deal. And one of the fascinating parts about it was being in one of those mansions that was still being lived in by a family. And at one point, wandering from the basement to the attic, all on my own, without a tour guide saying, come here, go here, don't do that. And it was fascinating. Another time I got called to Newport to do an appraisal. Now, when I do appraisals at groups like this, or all day long, I do hundreds and hundreds of free appraisals. My goal is that whenever you think of an old book, you think of me and the Brattle Bookshop. I don't care if you think of 10 others, just as long as I'm one of the 10. And one of the ways I feel I can do that is by giving out as much free information as reasonable. There are times, though, when we very formal appraisals for insurance, estate taxes, I discuss the fee. Any case, another mansion in Newport, not quite as big as the Brown family. This was the Perry family. Commodore Perry, Oliver Hazard Perry. And what they had was a whole stack of papers from the War of 1812. During the war, their family were privateers. Well, they're privateers if you're on our side. They're pirates if you're on the other side. It's all the way you look at it. But it was the day-to-day accountings of the ships. They were fascinating to read through. They would sometimes capture a ship and realize tens of thousands of dollars profit. In 1812, that was an incredible amount of money. Then one day, one of the ships got into a battle. The ship got hit. The captain got hit. He lost his leg. 3 days later, there was a tiny entry at the bottom of a page, and it said, Captain, $5 bonus, loss of leg. And that was the last you heard of the captain. So it's changed a little nowadays, too. When my father was still alive, he died over 30 years ago, we got a call from a lady, vague about her name, who she was, what she wanted, what she had, but it sounded interesting. She lived in Sharon. It was fairly close. We get to the house. It was a little ranch house. Paint was peeling. Weeds were growing. And you sort of say, oh, gee, what's going to be here? She answered the door. She was quite elderly. We walk in, and there were just gorgeous antiques everywhere. I mean, really, really beautiful antiques. Turned out she was originally from the Boston area, but she had married the Prince of the Ukraine, the cousin of the Tsar of Russia. He had escaped just before the revolution, and she told story after story about being Russian nobility in Europe and all the court intrigues and all the goings on, how T.E. Shaw used to stay at their house all the time, how she didn't think he accidentally died on a motorcycle. T.E. Shaw, of course, was Lawrence of Arabia. And she went on and on and on with these wonderful stories. Turned out her books were lousy, but the stories were absolutely wonderful. And when we first got into the house, on one of her walls, she had 10 watercolors. They were pastoral European scenes. When I first saw them, I thought they were nice. And the more she talked and the longer we were there and the more I looked at them, the nicer I thought they were. And I finally said to her, well, those 10 watercolors, they're really nice. And she said, oh, yes, they're all Turners. So she had 10 original Turner watercolors, probably $1 million worth of painting. It was like, oh, yes. So you never know, again, what you're going to see and the characters. And matter of fact, speaking of characters, about 20 years ago, we went to one of our customers' 100th birthday parties. Now, when you go to a man's 100th birthday party, and he tells you he just got back from Barcelona, he's going to give a talk in Florida, and he's been asked to lecture in Tokyo. And I finally said to him, wait a minute, you're 100 years old. Don't you think Tokyo is a long way to go? And he said, well, when I used to work, it took me well over 25 hours to get to Chicago. He says, I don't think Tokyo's a whole lot further than that nowadays. And here's a man who could tell you about one day sitting down to dinner with Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. He said he was a young man, obviously, at the time, but really looking forward to this dinner and the learning and insight he'd get. And he said he was excited. He got there a few minutes early. He said about 5 minutes later, Ford came in and sat down next to him. And about 15 minutes later, Edison came in. Now, Edison was elderly, had one of those big, huge horns for hearing, and he sat down opposite. And he said, this man said the first thing, Ford turned to Edison and yelled, my Tom, you look very good. And Edison turned to Ford and yelled, it's the Carter's little liver pills. This man said all night long, all they did was yell about Carter's little liver pills. And he said next time he wanted to learn something, he went to the library. I can go on with these about going out. I'll tell one more of that, and then I'll get on to a few other subjects. We get hundreds of phone calls at the store. People wanting to know, do you have a book? Can you get a book? How hard is it to get the book? Does the book exist? Or what's the value? How much is it worth? And so on. And we answer, the people, myself and the people I work with, answer those questions all day long, and we're happy to. But most of them are pretty standard. Every once in a while, one's a little more involved. And occasionally, you really have to do some research, and that can be fun. But then there's the call that you just remember. It just stands out. And this was, again, a while ago. I answered the phone. Hello, Brattle Bookshop. Can I help you? Lady, elderly, thick Irish brogue. And the first thing she says is, President Kennedy slept with me. Now, you have to admit, she waited and stopped and think about it. Get your attention. Turned out she worked for the Kennedy family. When he was 2 and 3 years old, he used to fall asleep in her arms. So he did sleep with her, but not what you might first think. And what she had was a whole series of handwritten letters from the president. She wanted to get an offer on them. I was skeptical, actually, about that, but I thought she'd be fun to meet. I went to her house. She was great, wonderful stories. Letters were fabulous. I gave her a tremendous offer, at least I thought it was, on them, but there was no way she could sell these letters. Letters were part of her life. I left a note behind, and maybe someday, as far as I know, her family still has them. Maybe someday I'll hear about them again, but that's the type of thing that just keeps things going. That's a lot of the real fun. But it's also the people. And one question that comes up a lot for me, and one part of it I might answer now or a little later, but it's a little different take on it. People ask me, what's the best thing you ever had? What's the oldest? What's the thing that you've held? And we've had so many things. It's almost impossible to say what's the best, the most interesting. It's almost whatever's new the next day. But a few things that I'll mention. And then at the very end, I'll give an answer that I actually stole from a friend of mine. I heard another colleague who does Antiques Roadshow with me and now has his own bookstore, but was with Christie's auction, tell the answer. And I asked him, that answer fits exactly with mine. Can I use that? And he said, absolutely. But in any case, I'm going to talk about a few things that I've had over the years. One of the oldest books I've had, I one time had a page from the Gutenberg Bible, which was the first printed book in 1455. A full Gutenberg Bible now would sell for tens of millions of dollars. I was actually once a question on Jeopardy about Gutenberg Bible. I didn't know it. Someone had called me up a few months before, asked me what would a Gutenberg Bible go for? And at the time I said 20, 30 million dollars. And I like watching Jeopardy. And I was sitting home watching it, and all of a sudden, Ken Gloss, the question was, Ken Gloss says this would be the most expensive and I'm going, whoa. In any case, and there are many, many Bibles and things. But that's one of the oldest. But a few of the things that really stand out over the years. Sometimes I do appraisals for libraries, or where they just need a value. Now, there was this one museum in Boston, Historical Society, and they were loaning something from one historical society to another, and they needed an insurance appraisal because of the item was going to be out. And I'm a member. I told them I'd do the appraisal for free, but I didn't want to do it from the web page, from a copy. I wanted the original item to see it. And they said, fine, come over and we'll let you see it. And I'm sitting there, and it's a 4-page handwritten account of Paul Revere's ride by Paul Revere. So I'm sitting there holding a 4-page that he wrote a week after the account, telling what happened. I mean, one of the things, when you ask people why are letters and signed documents and things collectible, you're touching and holding something that George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Albert Einstein, Paul Revere held, and they sat down and put their thoughts in, and you just hold that paper. And even though I do this all the time, it still sends chills up your spine. That it's amazing. It's a lot of fun. Now, another item that I got called in once, and again, this was an appraisal item. It was actually at Babson College, and they had a collection of Isaac Newton books and letters. And Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, which is the cornerstone done in the 1600s of modern mathematics. A first edition of that book runs upwards of $1 million. What they had, though, was the first edition, Isaac Newton's copy, that he made marginal notes and annotations in. And I'm sitting there and holding Isaac Newton's copy of Principia Mathematica. I mean, you almost can't put a price on something like that. But anyways, at one point it went from Babson College to a collection at MIT, and then went to a collection at the Huntington Library, where it is now in California. Before the pandemic, my wife and I were in California in Pasadena. We went to the Huntington Library. We went in, and we particularly went to the glass case where that copy was sitting, and I'm standing there looking at it and saying, I held that once. It was just amazing. Other things that we've had that have been really great. I had a copy of photographs of the American Indians by Curtis. It's 20 volumes of big, huge photographs. Usually you only see them in museums. I got them, and my wife and I went to go through the 700 photographs one at a time a number of years ago. Now, at the time, it was worth a little over $100,000. Now it's worth a little over millions of dollars. And as we were looking, they were beautiful. We were enjoying it. And my daughter was probably in the 3rd or 4th grade. She goes, can I bring these to show and tell? And we said, gee, that would be nice, but no, probably not. And I couldn't afford to keep it, so I got it. And sometimes some of the more memorable books you get are not the most valuable. A few years ago, I bought a collection of cookbooks. It was a few thousand cookbooks, and it was a great collection. And it went back to the 1700s, 1800s, a few thousand books. But what what there was also with this collection was a whole box of these little pamphlets, like how to make Jell-O, bake a chocolate company recipe, you know, these little pamphlets. A lot of them are colorful, a lot of them are good, but they take a lot of time. Some of them were worth a little bit, but I said, look, we've got 2,000 very good books to deal with. I said to one of my assistants, just put these outside on the dollar table. And so they did. About 2 or 3 hours later, a customer comes running in with this. He was absolutely beside himself. He goes, I've been looking for this for years and years and years, and it was outside and I found it. And he was just, I can't describe how happy he was. And then I looked at it. The title was Coconuts and Constipation. And you go, you never know what people are going to be looking for. And again, I could go on and on and on with many books. One of the things that I'd like to talk about a little is I've been doing for 20 years the Antiques Roadshow. And a lot of people ask about that and what it's like to do it and fun. Matter of fact, well, since it's today, I'll be on Monday on one of their older shows. I know that I'm going to be on Monday. It's from Las Vegas. But in any case, Antiques Roadshow is a lot of fun. One of the things many people don't realize, though, is they don't pay us anything. They don't pay the airfare. They don't pay the hotel. They don't pay the meals. It's public television. But we get good PR, publicity. It's great. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, I'm very lucky. Most of the shows that I do, when I go on them, my wife can come with me. And we, a lot of times, maybe even go a few days early. Or if there's two shows close to each other, a week or so apart, sometimes we'll make a road trip out of it. And why would I ever go to Boise, to Fargo, to Omaha, or take a road trip from Sarasota to Tulsa, or from Birmingham to Austin? I mean, anywhere you go in this country, if you have any time and effort, it's beautiful and the people are wonderful. Don't talk about politics and religion, but the people are wonderful. And so that's one of the great things about it, is just being able to travel the country. Also, the crew of appraisers and the staff and crew, we've gotten to know very well. Most of them have become very good friends. One of the appraisers who does Tiffany, my wife and I have had Sunday FaceTime dinner with for the last year in pandemic. We can't get together. We can't go to New York and visit them, but we've done, and so many good things. But the way the Antiques Roadshow works is you go to a venue. It used to be convention centers. Now it's museums or societies or whatever. You appraise on one day, whether it's a weekend or a weekday, from about 7:30 in the morning, sometimes till 6, 7 at night, pretty much straight through. There's a table with 3 book appraisers next to prints, next to jewelry, next to on and on and on. And usually 3, 4, 5,000 people come to a show. Each person has 2 items. So there's 6,000 to 10,000 items that come in. And they tape somewhere around 100. Some are very short tapes and some are longer. It makes up 3 hours of television. But there is no guarantee for an appraiser that you're going to get on TV. Nothing's almost, well, there are a few that are prearranged, but almost nothing is prearranged. So you're hoping that someone not only brings in an item that's really interesting, that they don't know everything there is to know about it, and that the producers will want for TV. And the ideal situation on Antiques Roadshow is something comes in to you early in the morning. Because if something comes in at 7, 8 in the morning, and then you call a producer over, they go, yes, go film it, 8, 8:30, you're done. You filmed something. So the rest of the day is pretty easy. Whereas if you haven't filmed when it's 4, 5, 6 o'clock at night, you start getting really nervous that you're not going to get anything. You're going to go home. You never get on TV. So that's sort of the general way it works. And there was one city, it was Kansas City, I remember. And again, you're always hoping for that good item in the morning. I was there, it was maybe 8 o'clock in the morning, and a man comes in and he has a few items from Pope John Paul, a few signatures, rosary beads, and so on. They're nice, but there wasn't a big story to it. But the next thing, he pulls out a photograph. Turns out he was the pilot who flew the Pope and his entourage around the country when he came in the 70s. And he had all sorts of stories about the back scenes and the entourage and the different people. And then he has this photograph. Now, normally when you see the Pope with people, the Pope standing there in his vestments, he has his ring, people are lined up, they kneel down, kiss the ring, and it's all very, very formal. In any case, he has a picture. He's in the pilot's seat in his pilot's uniform. The Pope is standing behind him in his full vestments, leaning over with one leg up in the air, reaching over the Pope's shoulder, signing his Bible. And I'm going myself, this is fabulous. The Pope, up in the air, reaching over to sign his Bible and the stories. And I go, great, let me see the Bible. And he goes, oh, I didn't bring that. And I go, can you go get it? And he goes, no, it's in a safe deposit. I can't get it. And I'm going, oh. And fortunately, someone later in the day did come on with something I taped. But it was like, oh. So like I say, there are so many stories and so on. What I know that a lot of people signed in tonight. And one of the things that you'll never see this well on the people ask me what I collect. Let me tell one story about collecting, and then we'll get to questions and so on. I generally don't collect books. And one of the reasons for that is when I was growing up, my father was more an accumulator. He would bring home 4, 5, 6 books a day. Do that for 30 or 40 years, 6, 7 days a week. And you can imagine what our house looked like. I mean, I read a lot about books and book collecting, history. I like good sports writing. I also read Stephen King, John Grisham. I have a great John Grisham story that I might not get to, but if anyone ever follows up, I can tell them. But there is one collection that started as a bit of a joke. One day I got a book in, had a picture of a toilet on the cover. The title was Flushed with Pride, the story of Thomas Crapper, who invented the toilet. Brought it home, I showed it to my wife. She took one look at it and said, we have to put this in the bathroom. A few days later, I got another book. It had a big eye staring out of the cover. The title was We Never Sleep. It was a history of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. But with a big eye staring at you, I said, put that in the bathroom. Now, this is a little half bathroom, so there's no shower, no steam. Next thing you know, we built bookshelves, and now there are about 400 of these sort of Victorian-style illustrated books in the bathroom. People walk in, they're a little taken aback, loads of reading material, and one of the rules of the collection is that nothing can be valuable, because every once in a while a book falls off the shelf, and you can imagine where it ends up. My wife also, I'll quickly not go to one of her collections that she sold recently, but she has a collection of about 10 copies of The Diary of Anne Frank. I went to one place, I had a first edition in Dutch. It's a very rare book, and she has some other nice collections. And I have customers who collect one book. When I first started the store, even before that, we had a customer who collected Walden. He collected every edition, every copy, every color, every language, every variation on an edition, every publisher. He had 3,000 copies of Walden. That was his collection. He collected one book. And that's actually not that unusual. Alice in Wonderland, Christmas Carol, The Night Before Christmas. And that's one that I'll talk about a little bit later. But one of my collections is, I have sheets here. I don't know if anyone can really see them, but sheets and sheets with one line, one sentence. Every one of those lines and sentences is a story. So I just have hundreds of stories from the store, and I just keep collecting those stories. And like I say, one of the things, if you do like the stories, I'll point out I do a podcast. I have about 100 episodes out. They're 15 to 20 minutes. If you like these kind of stories, I do them, they're on Apple Cast, or you can go to our website. But if you like the stories, I've got 100 out. I put a new one out every 2 weeks. But I'll tell you what, why don't we see if there are some questions? Because again, I can go on, and if there are a lot of questions, I'll get to as many as I can. I want to finish the talk with one or two quick stories, but why don't we see if there are some, and if are there some that have on the chat line or that you can read?
I do see one out here on the chat line, and
Okay.
it is, oops, another one just popped in. Have you ever thought about writing your memoirs?
The question is, yeah, I've thought about it. The problem is, I'm great at talking. I love talking, which is part of what the podcast does. I'm not a great writer. I mean, that's a whole special talent. And what I tend to find is when I write, the stories flatten out. In other words, what comes over talking-wise, exciting and enthusiasm, written down, I'm not a great writer. It's a special talent. I've talked about it with other people, but as of right now, no, I haven't, although I would love to. But that's why I also keep all these stories. That's why I do the podcast. That's why I do the lectures, is I get it out there. But someday, maybe.
Well,
One of my daughters is a better writer than I am. Maybe someday, except we'd probably kill each other, but we'd get it down. But I've thought about it. It's just I have to get, a thunderbolt has to come down and make me a great writer to get everything across.
well,
And
your enthusiasm certainly comes out in person,
Thank
so
you.
it's lovely to have you here. We have a few more questions. What is old versus antique? And it says versus road, and I'm not sure I don't know if somebody can clarify that, but we'll start with the first part.
Well,
What's the difference between
what is old and what is antique? I mean, usually people say antique is 100 years old, but quite honestly, it's whatever anyone considers old. I mean, printed books go back to the 1400s. The manuscripts in the monasteries that they did go back, Caesar wrote books. I mean, you can go back to thousands of years with books. But one of the things, when people ask me what's old, usually what I tell people to look for is what's old in relation to what it's about. In other words, a book on the American Revolution written in the 1770s is an old book. It's contemporary to it. A book written on the 1870s on the American Revolution really isn't that old, or at the bicentennial in the 1970s. A book on maybe on radiology in the early 1900s is an old book. A book on computer theory, electronic computer written during World War II is an old book. So a lot of times put it into perspective as to what the book is about. Is it old? Also, when you're looking at specific authors, usually the older in their writing it is, the better. In other words, when an author comes out with their first book, usually they're relatively unknown. Usually it's a small printing because the publisher doesn't know if it will sell. So usually the older books in their writing, like Stephen King, a first book of Stephen King can be very much collected. And as he went on, now his books are huge. A first edition of the first Harry Potter book is only 20 years old, but the British edition in good condition can sell upwards of $100,000. The last book in the series, the first edition was probably 10 million copies. It's never going to be valuable and old. So put old into perspective, and that's a lot of where it can be. And you can also have books that are 1600s, 1700s that were dull, uninteresting books then, and they're still dull and uninteresting books now, and nobody really cares or will pay very much for them. So it's also subject material, what it is, but sometimes though, again, when I do talks live, I have a page from the 1400s that I pass around so everybody can see what the paper feels like. Anyways, are there others out there?
Yes, there are. There's quite a few. I'm up to 6 at this point.
Well, at about, let me just say, at about, in about 10 or 12 minutes, I want to finish talking about a few stories, so we'll allow some time for that too.
Okay, awesome. So how does restoration affect the value of a damaged book?
Well, usually when a collector is collecting a book, they want it as close to the original condition as you can possibly get, in as good a condition as you can possibly get. So the perfect condition is optimal, and it can vary with the type of book. Also, restoration is expensive. And if you have a damaged $5 book and you put a $500 restoration in it, when you're done with it, you're still going to have a $5 book. Restoration, to get done properly and well, is expensive. I mean, the people who do it are craftspeople. They've got to support themselves. So putting a maybe $100 or $200 restoration into a $5,000 book might make perfect sense. If, though, you have a book that's really fragile, doesn't look good, but it's all original, maybe the smarter thing to do is not restore it, but maybe have the bookbinder make a nice box for it, which can be relatively simple out of the proper materials, or it can be beautiful leather, it can be wonderfully done, it can be jewel encrusted if you want, and that's what's sitting on the shelf that people see on the shelf, but it's protecting the original as it is. And usually I would say the less you do, probably the better it is. Now, when you get into the condition, and this is where things can really tell a difference. Great Gatsby is a well-collected book now. In a first edition of Great Gatsby in good condition, without the paper dust jacket, it's still a valuable book. Depending on how good it is, it's $1,000 to maybe $4,000 or $5,000. I mean, that's still a lot of money. But the paper dust jacket on that book was particularly fragile, particularly got damaged easy, not well made, but it's a beautiful, beautiful dust jacket of a highly collectible book. If you have a beautiful copy of Great Gatsby in a beautiful dust jacket, the price isn't $5,000, it might be $125,000. So that essentially means that paper dust jacket is worth over $100,000. But take the jacket away, make it in not good condition, and it drops precipitously. I have friends who collect first editions of sometimes of modern authors. And what they do, and I'll give them credit for this, when a new book comes out, they buy 2 copies. One copy they put in the glassine behind the glass case. Nobody ever touches it. The other copy they read. And so there are collectors who get to that point. I have a friend who collects Dickens, and he has these beautiful first editions. I mean, they're fragile, they're wonderful, they're in his glass case. And I will give him credit. He goes out to our $5 tables, finds a copy of Dickens, and then he reads that copy. So condition, repair. But the other thing to take into consideration when you're doing repair work, let's say you have the old family Bible that's been handed down generation to generation, and you want to have it fixed up. Well, then take it to a binder, have it looked at. They'll give you the price. Sentimentally, that's a decision. It's not a monetary decision. It's a sentimental. Again, probably try to do the least you can, but then the money isn't the issue. The sentiment's the issue.
Great. Thank you. Okay, next question. Are personal journals that span 70 years from one writer worth anything? He was a National Geographic photographer who traveled the world.
Well, whenever you talk about personal journals, it depends on what they're doing, who they are. Now, if you have George Washington's personal journal of Valley Forge, his writing could not even be good, and it still would be incredibly valuable. On the other hand, you can have an average person who's a really good writer, writing about series and events or common life or whatever, and that can be quite valuable. Matter of fact, I'll get to the specific, but Civil War journals and letters show up a lot, and most of them are not particularly interesting. They say it's cold, it's damp, the food's not good, speaking of food, and on and on. And they really, and maybe I was at a battle, but during the battle, you don't have time to write, so it doesn't get into great detail. So and that's usually the common foot soldier. What I would love to find is a Civil War journal of the cook, who was behind the lines a little, but described how you got supplies, how they fed the troops, all the logistics, and that you never see. And one of the most valuable Civil War books that I saw, and I'm trying to explain that this is all about content. It was a standard average Civil War journal, but there were 2 pages in this 100-page journal. They were behind the lines, they had a day off, and the man described that they played a baseball game. They, just having fun. And he said, in this baseball game, he got hit by a ball, run down on the bases, hurt his leg sliding, had more injuries in this game than he had had in 2 years of battle at the Civil War. But because there were 2 pages of baseball, this journal, instead of selling for a few $100s, sold for $10,000 to a baseball collector. So if someone has a journal of a photographer who went all around the world for National Geographic, and if they wrote in a style that absolutely brings to life being with National Geographic in all of these remote places, and just really, you can feel you're there with the person, and it would depend on when they were there and what they were doing, that would have much more value than just sort of a general entry. So one of the first things I tell people with that type of journal is you have to read it. And if it's in handwriting, that can be a job. And then maybe write a two-page summary of the high points, what it is, who the person was, where they went, what their lifespan was. If it was a photographer, it was interspersed with photographs, that would even be better. But in order to get the real value, you have to read it and then figure out what it is. But there's no general, like I say, any journal of Washington, Lincoln, someone who's very, very famous, regardless what they write, has value. But the more the content is, the better it is, the higher the price.
Great. Now, you've got 10 minutes. Can I slide in one question before you do?
Slide it in.
Because I like this question. How often are signed copies frauds?
How often are signed copies frauds? Is an interesting thing. I just read in a book collecting journal that a man in the Boston area who was an autograph and manuscript dealer for years, and one of the prominent ones in the world, just gave his collection of fakes and frauds to the Grolier Society in New York. He had thousands of them. And it's a whole study of what the fakes and the frauds are. Now, one of the things that you've got to remember, the person who is the best forger or fake, you'd never know. By definition, if you're the absolute best there ever is, nobody's ever going to know, because by definition, the best one would never be found. But there are times when it shows up. And what you run into a lot is very easy, because most of the people, it doesn't make any difference whether it's the original or not, because it's not worth anything. So who would bother to fake a signature that isn't worth anything? Now, some people do it as jokes. Some of the ones that are harder to design are presidents or very famous people, because a lot of times they have secretaries or auto pens or mechanical writing devices that are their signature or very close. And there are whole books that you can go through to try to tell what is real, what isn't. And then there are people who do fraud for, to deceive people and make money. And one of the problems with things on the internet, when you're dealing with someone you don't know, sometimes you get caught. But there are some very, very famous cases. Matter of fact, there was just a show that I saw, what was it called? It was Murder in Utah, or Murder Among the Mormons. It's on Netflix or something that you can watch it. It's actually interesting. And this is a man who was creating documents, literally creating documents that called into question the foundations of the Mormon Church. And then what he was doing is he was selling them to the Mormon Church. And what they were doing was putting them in vaults where you couldn't find them, see them, or use them because they called into question the foundation of the church. They didn't want any of this. Well, they were frauds. They were phonies. He was selling them for a lot of money. But what's the best way to have something that you're frauding or faking or forging is have it put somewhere where nobody else can ever look at it. Now, he did forge other signatures and things. Things were falling apart. He was getting close to being caught. He actually murdered 2 people, got caught, and he's in jail in Utah. And if you've defrauded the Mormon Church and murdered people in Utah, you're never getting out. But it's a fascinating story. But there were Hitler diaries that were forged. There were Jack the Ripper diaries that were forged. So there has been a lot. And what happens is no one person can know everything. And you don't have to know everything. All you have to do is know who knows. So a lot of times when someone comes to me, I'm a generalist. We deal in all subjects, areas, fields, and also autographs, manuscripts, and so on. And if someone brings me something that's really valuable or appears to be really valuable, and I'm not quite sure about it, what I'll do is I have colleagues who I can consult, and I know the right one to call, and I say, look, John, what do you think of this? Why don't we go in together on this? So I don't have to be the expert. I just have to know who the expert is to call them in and check. But there are a lot out there. The higher the price, the more valuable it is, the more you want to deal with somebody who's reputable. And even the most reputable person can make a mistake. But the most reputable person who makes a mistake will also stand behind their mistake. So that would be my general advice. Although the collector who tells me that they have collected for 30 or 40 years and never, ever made a mistake, my first reaction to that is that's the biggest mistake you could ever make, because it means that you never took a chance and you probably passed up a lot of things that you should have got. And the one mistake that you might have made or the two don't make up for the great finds you passed up. So in any case, I'll tell you what, it is getting on, and I'll finish with 2 stories. And anyone who I didn't get to, if you want to email me, call, get in touch, come into the store, whatever. One of the problems that when you ask somebody who loves what they're doing a question, the problem isn't getting an answer. It's getting them to stop answering. So, like I say, there isn't time to do it all here. So just feel free with appraisals, with anything. Get in touch, ask. We're good about getting back. But 2 things. When I was talking about what do I think is the most valuable book, and we've had books worth tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars, or books that are memorable from the stories. But my most valuable, or the book that means the most to me, is there is a copy of The Night Before Christmas that I have. It's very nicely illustrated. And from the time that my daughters were infants, I have read every Christmas Eve to them from that particular edition of The Night Before Christmas to them. Now, my daughters are in their mid-30s now. And one of my daughters is married to a man from Texas. Now, although he's from Texas, they live in this area. But a lot of times on Christmas, they go down to his house. Now, when the internet first came in, she had me read it on YouTube and then post it. So on Christmas Eve, she could watch YouTube and I'd be reading to her. Now FaceTime does it. My other daughter lives in Nairobi. She's been there for 8 or 10 years. Christmas Eve, I read from this particular edition of the night. That copy of The Night Before Christmas is more valuable and means more to me than probably any of the hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of books that I've had, because it's the personal, it's the sentiment. I'm going to end the talk with one last story about, I'm going to talk about Bibles. And one of the reasons I like to do that is Bibles are the most commonly printed book of all time, always have been, probably always will be. And we sometimes get 5 and 10 calls a week with people who have 100, 200-year-old family Bibles. And in most cases, we have to say to them, if this is your family Bible and it's been handed down through the generations, sentimentally, it's priceless. Monetarily, maybe not so much. Now, if it's one of those big old Victorian Bibles with beautiful clasp, gorgeous binding, perfect condition, they can sell for $100 to $300. They make wonderful gifts for ministers, priests, divinity students. Break one class, have one hinge go, they lose all that value. Now, sometimes in the middle, beginning, or end of those, there's a genealogy, all the births, deaths, marriages, and many times the local historical genealogical society maybe wants that information. So they want to Xerox or photocopy that page, maybe the title page. They don't want the whole big old Bible. In any case, I got called to a church, a well over 100-year-old church in Boston, and they wanted me in there because they had a very large library, and they just wanted to see if over the years they'd accumulated any rare or valuable books. I spent a day there, and it was fun. They actually had some good books. It was a fun thing, a great library. At the end of the day, the priest said to me, could you come down the basement? There are a few more books. I said, sure, no problem. Went down the basement, looked at a few interesting books. But then off in the corner of the basement, there was a closet. It was more like a small room. The priest opened the door, front to back, floor to ceiling, top to bottom. It was stuffed full of thousands of old Bibles. And I looked at the priest and I said, well, what is this? And he says, well, people hate to throw away a book. They feel it's sacrilegious to throw away a Bible. So what happens when a parishioner dies and the family doesn't want the Bible? They come and they present it to the church. And he says, what do? We very graciously accept it. We don't want to offend anybody. And then we go downstairs, open the door, put it in with the rest of them. And he says, and we can't drive a dumpster up to the back of the church and fill it full of Bibles. That would just be terrible. So I use it as an example to say that if you want to donate something to a charity, ask them if they want it first. If they want it and can use it, it's great. But if all you're doing is taking your old, it's really not doing anyone a favor. Like I say, I'll end on that note. I'll thank everybody for tuning in. Hopefully someday we'll be able to do this soon, again, live. It's still a lot more fun seeing people, having people line up with books to appraise. But if you, again, listen to the podcast if you like the stories, Brattlecast. Call, email, question, put phone numbers, and we'll answer any and all, or at least we'll try to answer any and all questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ken. That was terrific. And thank you to the audience for all your great questions. Electra did put Ken's email address out there. So it's brattlebookshop@gmail.com. Or if you have any questions.
Or just Google Brattle Bookshop. The webpage comes up. All the contact and information is in there.
Fabulous. Thank you. And I hope everybody's able to join us in May. Our May 18th event is on the Anka Society, and Anka is a fabulous organization, and we are going to have a panel that night and be talking to Kate Carpini as well as Phyllis Gleason, talking about the history and what Anka does for everybody here in Winchester. So please join in for that. It is also, they are not able to have a fair this year, so this hopefully you can jump in and join us for that event as well. So with that, thank you again, Ken, and
thank you.
Have a great night, everybody.
Good night.